Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, from wherever you're joining from. My name is Tahil Sharma, and I am the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University. We're very excited to have you today be a part of this conversation with our friend here, ChrisRay Alexander, who I'm going to introduce a bit more properly in a bit. But for those who don't know, including the speaker, the Interfaith Center at Miami University has been around for quite some time. It functioned originally as the Wesley Center, going back some decades. And there began a shift to a more ecumenical interfaith priority. It used to originally be part of just the Miami University sort of system until 2014 when they decided to become their own 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization. And since 2014, the organization has been doing a lot of interfaith programming across different issues, both in person and virtually. Our executive director, Geneva Blackmer, has been someone who's been really involved with interfaith work in a lot of local, national, and international interfaith contexts, and is currently doing her PhD at Cambridge. So she and I are doing a lot of the virtual work to be able to introduce a lot of issues that have been important to community members, our board members who are made up of faith community leaders and members across traditions. And we try to make it a space where learning about different kinds of ways to engage interfaith work are super important. Which is why we have the opportunity to be able to here today from Chaplain and Scholar of Religious Studies, ChrisRay Alexander, who has been a close friend of mine for the last several years, who has given me a lot of ways to learn and discern about, new and evolving approaches to interfaith work. And he is based in Atlanta, if I remember correctly, and works at Woodward, correct? Yeah. And so I am really excited to be able to have Chris speak to us today because Chris and I have had many years of conversation sort of focused on sort of the evolving ways that we look at pluralism, the ways that we look at the social and political constructs of interfaith work, and I think particularly how today's conversation focuses on deepening our understanding and relationships across difference as we navigate the realities of worsening polarization and the apathy, distrust, and dismissal of ideological opponents. So I really couldn't imagine someone who could speak better to this than Chris today. So I'm going to be quiet and go off camera. And Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Top Hill, for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. And greetings, everyone. As Top Hill said, my name is ChrisRay Alexander. Ray Alexander is my last name altogether, as you can see here. My wife and I made what seemed to be a common sense decision to combine our names when we got married, and we have been explaining for the last 14 years. So I am here in Atlanta, as Todd Hill said, and I'm at a school called Woodward Academy. I am their chaplain and chair of religious studies. Woodward is an interesting community because we are the oldest independent school in this region. We were established in 1900. When I worry about job security, I always think, well, we made it through the Great Depression. Surely we'll make it through this. With that being said, my position is unique because we began actually as Georgia Military Academy. And then when we became Woodward Academy, they decided to endow the chaplaincy. And so while I am a chaplain, I also have no confessional affiliation at the institutional level. Although I am an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. So that gives me the distinct advantage of being a formally recognized interfaith chaplain in this space. We have young people that practice many different faith traditions, and also who don't recognize any specific faith tradition, but are interested in cultivation and spiritual formation. And we have those who don't use any of that language at all, or maybe are even disinterested in some of those questions. And my goal is to foster meaningful belonging between all of those people. And to do that in not just the Southeast, but in Atlanta, which brings with it surely its own perils and promises. And so it's from that space that I'll be speaking with you today. I should also note that I am the Minister for Interfaith Engagement at First Congregational United Church of Christ in downtown Atlanta. So much to be said about all of this. And I actually, as a part of this presentation, will be mentioning a little bit more about my own personal history because I think it's apropos of this subject. Um, but with that being said, does anyone have any immediate questions, worries, concerns that we can address before I go ahead and dive in?
I only share one concern, and that concern is will we have enough time to cover all the things you want to talk about? Because you are a treasure trove of information, and I want to make sure we do that time justice.
Right on. You act like you've had many conversations with me. How dare you? Um, well, then I will go ahead and jump in. And it's interesting, even in Tahil's introduction, the question of polarization was brought up. I'm going to share my screen now, and we will note something together, God willing. Uh, can everyone see that? Tahil, would you just give me a yes, or would someone give me a thumbs up?
Yep, it's clear.
Fantastic. So you'll notice that the title of this presentation or this gathering is moving between hearts with the subtitle an exploration of politics, progress, and deep change. And the word polarization doesn't appear here. And that's very much on purpose for reasons that I will explain. Um, so I don't know how things are going in Ohio, but I'm involved in interfaith work in many different ways here in Atlanta, and I would suggest that there's probably a common trend that I've seen over the last several years, wherein the interfaith gatherings that I attend are often overlap with, or sometimes are directly focused on other gatherings that have to do with things like election integrity or depolarization, or polarization. What are we going to do with it when the answer isn't immediately thought to be depolarization? And several other themes that really illustrate that the issue of how we interact vis-a-vis our religious and cultural identities and the way that we engage with politics and explore our political identities are not only difficult to divorce, but on my argument, are in fact inextricable. Um, what I want to suggest then is that this is a reason why polarization is such a recurrent feature of our conversations. And also, in my view, one of the reasons why we should attempt to take a step back and see if that is the lens that is most conducive to the aims that we have, especially if we have a dual commitment to interfaith relationship building and also to an emancipatory politics. These are two commitments that I strive to honor in my own life. Um, and so, my question here is, in the first instance, not how can we have a more civil politics? It's not how can we have a politics that benefits from faith perspectives. It's not a question of how can we engage in politics in ways that takes into account religious difference. These are all themes that I hear with some great frequency, and surely sometimes engagement with those themes is laudable. And yet, I want to ask a more basic question, which is, what makes a change of heart seem impossible? And if it isn't impossible, what makes a change of heart more likely? And so this is my basic question, and happy to entertain other options. So actually, let me just ask the question, and if anyone wants to engage, I invite you to, as a person who has, as surely many of us do, family members and even friends who have uh, radically different political worldviews and religious worldviews than I do. I think frequently my conversations with them are in some way motivated by a desire for them to have a change of heart, and also at the same time burdened by what seems to be an impossibility of that happening. And so this is why I asked this question. And again, I ask it of all of you: what makes a change of heart in any of these situations, and feel free to clarify, seem impossible? So if anyone wants to unmute and share, you're welcome to.
Anyone in the chat that's willing to, you should be able to unmute if you'd like. If not, or you don't feel comfortable, just let us know in the chat.
And can I see the chat right now,
You should
Uphill?
be able to, maybe.
I think because
Whatever.
I'm sharing, maybe. Oh, wait, no, I can't. I can't over here. Yeah. Okay. So I've got the chat open. And just give it a couple more seconds. I really would like to for us to share together, but if we're not in a position to do that, I understand as well, as a person who has mastered the art of mostly surviving while driving and zooming. Mostly. So, okay. So what I'll do then is jump into some of the answers that occurred to me and that whenever I have this conversation with people often come up. What makes a change of heart seem possible? Well, we might say that changes of heart uh, and I should clarify, it's we might think that a change of heart in any given person may or may not seem possible for a litany of reasons. But why does it seem impossible to look for a change of heart in the first place? Like, how do we frame a change of heart? This is a question I'm asking in part because I ultimately want to ask a deeper question, which is, what is the heart? What is this thing we're looking to change when we talk about a change of heart? And so here's some of the things we might say. We might say that a change of heart is too slow. And surely I've witnessed this on multiple occasions. I have seen people have changes of heart, but it took a long time. Sometimes maybe someone has, their like a sudden shock or a moment of truth or some kind of epiphany, and as a result of that, they have a transformation of their psyche, something that in the Christian tradition, St. Paul would call it metanoia, a total shift in their understanding. But oftentimes it takes a while. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance to wade through. And even when one seems to have had a change of heart, a change in perspective and motivation might still require an extensive renovation of the things that we have thought about particular issues up until that point. I will confess that having been brought up according to a very specific worldview that I often describe as fundamentalist, charismatic, and evangelical. People value those terms differently. I use them because they're the ones I would have used in that moment. As a Christian, I believed a lot of different things that I no longer believe now, and yet every once in a while I will still start talking about a subject that I haven't talked about in 30 years and realize, wow, my underlying commitments have shifted, but the way that I'm articulating them hasn't shifted in accordance with that change. And so that's one issue. Now, sometimes it can also seem like talking about a change of heart is too soft. Maybe we want real, durable, palpable, tangible, hard change now. And in a world where change seems to be so desperately necessitated, I can surely identify with that sentiment that it seems like maybe our language isn't recognizing the gravity of the situation when what we do is engage with the heart instead of, for example, the material conditions of our given reality. Um, uh, so that maybe it's one other answer. Another one would actually is an interesting counterbalance to this. sometimes talking about a change of heart can feel too unsafe. And this is something I try to be really conscious of in this in my investigations in this direction is when I talk about the necessity of openness, of compassion, of empathy. To a lot of people, that can sound like leaving myself open, not just to those that I don't understand, but to those who are looking actively to harm me, or who have in fact harmed me already, or in some instances, who continue to harm me. And so I want to take that really seriously when we talk about this question of how do we engage with the heart. Um, and then lastly, maybe some kind of confluence of the too slow and the too soft would be the too immaterial. Well, what does it even mean to say? Why should we want something if we can't define what it would even be like? This is something, a debate that I frequently have, or at least bear witness to. I try to avoid debate. In my religious studies class that I teach here at Woodward for my seniors, who will, I have many students who identify as Christian and will say that, well, there's a person who has done these horrible things, has wounded a lot of people, but we know that they're still Christians because they repented. And then one could ask, well, but did their actions change? And they might say, well, no, but they said that they repented, and so they've been forgiven, and so that's what matters here. And as a person who grew up hearing a similar rhetoric, and in fact espousing that same rhetoric, I can understand why changes of heart would appear to be too immaterial, specifically when they seem to be divorced from a fitting pattern of action, right? It seems like when our heart changes, then our action should change. And I would suggest that when that isn't the case, what it actually tells us is that the thing that was supposed to have changed, the heart, is being understood in a particular way. And God willing, maybe we'll be able to understand it a little better at the end of this presentation. So, um, with that being said, we're talking about changes of heart, but how does one access the heart? How does one engage with the person who we would like to see do things differently? How do they engage with us when they had the same objective? To think about that, I want to recognize the fact that some boundaries feel sealed. Um, Sometimes it can feel like, oh, I haven't connected with a person because I haven't made an effort to connect with them. Or maybe I don't know the grounds upon which connection could happen. Or maybe I don't feel like we have anything in common, or I feel too distant. Spatial language can be used a lot to talk about the specific issue. But there's lots of reasons why we could feel that boundaries are sealed. And I think that keeping that idea in mind, it can be useful to explore what that boundary or the different, just a few different ways that we think of boundaries. Surely there are many. And so, what I like to think about is when I engage a boundary is this an open door? Now, note, an open door doesn't mean free passage. Anytime you see a door, presumably, there is a wall around it. There is some decision that has to be made. If I try to walk to the right or to the left of the door frame, what's there is a wall. So even in a space where the door is open, there's already been a decision that's been made about the space where access is afforded. In fact, those of us who are actually concerned about physical accessibility are all too aware of this. Just because there's a door doesn't mean that it's the right width to accommodate everyone. Just because there is a door doesn't mean that the walk up to it is at a proper elevation to make sure that everyone's dignity is respected. And so the open door is a part of a greater landscape. And so that's one thing that I would ask us to be aware of, even in moments when it feels like, oh, I can directly communicate with this person. There's an easy back and forth. Um, Surely, for those of us who occupy spaces in the corporate world, we will know this from the euphemism of the open door. If someone tells you that they have an open door policy, that does not mean that you can walk in at any time and say anything. And in fact, sometimes it can be a deterrent from you doing precisely that. The notion is, well, I have the illusion of access. Uh, how dare you disprove it by trying to access it? So this is one option, an open door. Another would be a locked gate. And in my mind here, I'm thinking of the kind of gates that I see around houses frequently, where you'll have like a fence, or sometimes, like a fence of like metal bars or maybe wood that you can see through, but the actual point of entrance has a gate, and it's shut and maybe it's locked. Um, what can we use this metaphor or how might we be able to use this metaphor to understand the kinds of connections that I'm exploring here? Well, I would suggest that a lot of people that we interact with have a locked gate. The trick to the locked gate is using what you have available to you, namely the visibility of what can be seen through the gate. Um, that can be a source of common ground. It can be a kind of attentiveness that might lead you to see someone coming to unlock the gate, or see someone going in and give you the opportunity to greet them. And I could extend the metaphor much further. But what I'm trying to draw attention to here is that there's a difference between an open door and a brick wall. And sometimes that difference is the locked gate, which requires us to be vigilant and to focus on at least metaphorical visibility. And I would ask that we continue to bear that part of the metaphor in mind as we get into a deeper consideration of the heart. Of course, if we run into a brick wall, we could try to scale it, but the brick wall can be a sign that maybe there's no way through here. Okay, but surely that's not the end of the conversation. It's just an extreme degree of limitation. And so, in thinking about these three different modalities of openness, the open door, the locked gate, or the brick wall, my hope is that we can recognize that not being able to connect with someone uh, is a matter of degrees. And so, an inability to connect, if it's a matter of degrees, would suggest that a different approach, persistence, a number of different methodologies could be employed to come closer to connection, as opposed to saying, well, I didn't connect, I can't connect, I'll stop trying to connect. This is what I'm hoping to encourage us all to do in this space. And so, in thinking about that shift in modality, I want to look at an example from a faith tradition from which I have learned a tremendous amount, and to which I'm deeply grateful. So, I want to talk about an interruption in the logic of impossibility. And so for this, I reach out to a beloved story from Sikhi, from the Sikh tradition, and I want to recall a story of a visit to a village that Guru Nanak Dev Ji made one day. Guru Nanak Dev Ji, of course, being born in the 15th century, sometimes called the founder of Sikhi, certainly the first human guru of Sikhi. He lived in a culture where there was certainly no monopoly on revelation or divine instruction or religious teaching. Lots of people were convinced that they knew the right way to live life, the right way to move beyond life, the right way to attain enlightenment, and in some senses, also the right way to attain salvation. And all those different ways were in fact different. They were incommensurate in some way. And so we're told the story of Guru Nanak visiting a village one day, and people in the village saw him coming, and they looked around and they saw, well, we have so many sages. We have so many fakirs, Islamic sages, and peers, Sufi sages within the Islamic mystical traditions. We have so many sadhus, sages within the Hindu mystical tradition. Certainly, they would have also had Buddhist monks who are in this place as well, and Jain practitioners as well. And they just thought, look, we can't stand one more person. We've got all the holy men we need. Okay. Um, living in the southeast of the United States, and as one of these people, I suppose I can readily identify with this sentiment. And so, what was their response? Well, they decided we're going to send him a message, and we know that he's a holy man. So we don't want to send the wrong message. We want to put it delicately. We're not just going to tell him to get out. And so they found a very ornate cup and they filled it to the absolute brim with milk. And then they brought out the cup of milk to Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And to him, the message was clear. Look, if we add one more drop to this cup, it will overflow. So how was he to respond? Well, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was a genius in many regards, and this is certainly one of them. So he reached into his bag when he saw this cup and pulled out a few leaves of saffron and rubbed them between his fingers and then dropped them on top of the milk. And they floated. They didn't displace any liquid. Not a single drop was spilled, but slowly saffron stain expanded across the top of the milk and it became more fragrant. It became more pleasing to the eye. And they understood then that the message that he was bringing was not one that was meant to displace, but one that was meant to enhance everyone else. He wasn't trying to take space, but he was trying to show a different way of making room for others. And so this is, apart from being a beautiful story, I think, an instructive logic that we can utilize in our conversations about what the heart is, what it does, and how we can connect with it. And it's also, in some way, a direct answer to the conversations to which I alluded earlier regarding the possibility of polarization and depolarization. Far too often, when I hear people talk about depolarization, it seems what they're saying is there a way to neutralize our politics? Is there a way to attenuate our political commitments? From my perspective, it often sounds like, is there a way for us to care a little less about emancipation, a little less about struggling for the freedom and dignity of other people, so that we don't make our social environment uncomfortable? And what I'm trying to suggest here is that depolarization and the logic that underpins it is the same as the logic of polarization. It's to say that, well, we're going to try to separate our politics from our civic life, which implies that our politics in some way don't have direct bearing on our civic life. And that assumption leads to the very politics that are creating the tensions, in my view, that lead us away from the chance to change our material realities, to change the way we relate to each other, to build new structures, and indeed to create the kind of politics that might actually alleviate the underlying causes for the thing we call polarization. And so, for this reason, in some sense, a deeply political reason, I like to look for a different kind of logic of relation that doesn't immediately assume that the problem with our politics is that we ask for too much or that we make people uncomfortable, but rather to say that the basis of our politics should be an attempt to connect with the hearts of others. And in this space, I want to suggest that starts with connecting with our own hearts. So what do we see from this example? A way to put it very concisely would be that the boundary did not disappear. When Guru Nanak adds the saffron leaves, the cup doesn't get bigger. The milk doesn't decrease. But the field of possibility changes. He was given an option, add more or do nothing. And he chose the third option, which wasn't mentioned, which is, oh, add something that's not milk in a different way that actually will affect this basic binary in a way that we could consider to be unpredictable. The boundary did not disappear, but the field of possibility changed. And what I want to suggest is that if we're interested in the field of possibility changing in any regard, in any of our struggles, in any of our interrelationships or encounters with other people, then we must begin with a change of perspective, which ultimately is deeply connected to a change of heart. And so I want to talk really quickly about Atlanta. Atlanta is where I find myself. I've been here since 2019, but I grew up in West Texas and then lived for quite some time in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, if any of you are Texans, you'll know that we will never, ever admit that we're a part of the South because we're quite simply just Texans. All of the historical proofs to the contrary will never interfere with our relentless claims to this effect. But because of this, from the perspective of literally anywhere else, I have been a Southerner for my entire life. Um, and I'm glad to have been so. Although surely it comes with its own trials and travails. Now, when I say Atlanta is not one thing, I want to emphasize that because I also want to emphasize that the South is not one thing, and moreover, that the people that make up the South are not one thing. Surely, as the philosopher Gilles Deleuze once wrote, we contain legions and multitudes, and the people of the South are no exception. I hinted earlier about my background. One of the things that gives me great encouragement about the possibility of people experiencing a change of heart is that I am one of those people. I was raised in a way that made me very uncomfortable around queer people, around Jewish people, around Muslims, really around any kind of a religious difference. I'm just giving you the most ready names. Now these are spaces where I find some of my greatest friends, these spaces where I try to be the best ally. And the result of that was not some kind of like rational argumentation, or the motivation for that was not some kind of rational argumentation that I had adhered to, but rather this a series of relationships and kindnesses that allowed my heart to move beyond the boundaries of the logic that had come to dictate how I understood my ability to relate to others, such that my heart actually resituated those boundaries and then gave me a deep and enduring connection to the very people that I would have once considered out of bounds. And so I return to the fact that Atlanta is not one thing. Now, there's like a way we could approach this, especially from a religious scholarly perspective and in a conversation about interfaith relationships and bridge building. We could say, for example, what the 2023 to 24 religious landscape study from the Pew Research Center tells us. It gives us these big numbers. We should immediately be dissatisfied with these big numbers because there is so much more going on than a Christian identity and an unaffiliated identity and an other religious identity. And yet these are numbers that you'll find, and someone could look at this, and from those very numbers, someone could say, okay, well, there's absolute Christian dominance in the South. And look, maybe there's like a rivalry with people that are atheist. And so there's some kind of counterbalance there, and stuck in the middle are all these other religions, who certainly are under the sway of the Christian domination. And there might even be some truth to that. But then we might also start to posit alliances and say, well, maybe these unaffiliated people, maybe they're in support of religion, or and in opposition to Christianity in particular, but maybe they form like a block with these other religions. You can imagine people like doing the math, especially in a political context. Who do I need to win? Who needs to be on my side? How am I going to form my coalition? And a number like this would give you a specific view on maybe how that could happen. Of course, if you want to understand what's happening on the ground or in uh, the communities or even in the hearts of people in this place, this will not get you very far. Now, we could break this up more too, and Pew certainly does. So, for example, at that big number, that 64% number, Pew notes that 27% of the Christians in Atlanta are evangelical Protestants. Um, Now, the interesting thing about this is that leaves us with a lot of space to make up, and there's not a predominance of Catholics in this space. So then we could ask, well, who are the Christians that are here that aren't considered evangelical Protestant. And we might say like mainline Christian churches, like my own, the United Church of Christ. But you can see how myopic this viewpoint would be. And then we can note that, oh, we have a 3% Hindu population, a 2% Jewish population, a 2% Muslim population, a 1% Buddhist population. But in noting that, we would actually also miss out on so many absolutely essential features, like the fact that the vast majority of our Hindu populations have their centers of worship, their mandirs, and other associated centers outside of the core area of Atlanta. They can be pretty far-flung communities. In the same way, you would miss that most of our Jewish communities actually exist pretty close to the city center. Although there are certainly exceptions, you might notice that there's a really even distribution of masajid throughout our community, and you might also notice that our Buddhist communities exist in pretty much like one specific area with a few outliers. So geographical distribution would be really distinct. You, of course, would miss the cultural affiliations. Anyone that comes to Atlanta will readily notice that if you go to any masajid or any masjid, you'll note that there are probably pretty strong cultural or ethnic ties. Even people that tell you that they feel welcome in every masajid or every masjid would say that there are ones that they prefer, and often that's not because of like the way the khutbah happens every day, but rather because of other kinds of cultural ties. You would note that if you go to different mandirs, that they are dedicated in different ways and draw different people. And often the biggest barrier to attendance is not one that would be considered cultural in the first instance, but rather linguistic. This is also the case for our Jain temple, which can only serve so many of our Jains because of the fact that it is in one specific language that many of the Jains in this community don't speak. In addition to that, you would fail to note the incredible diversity of our Buddhist communities with people coming from Laos, from Tibet, from Thailand, from Burma, from Japan, from mainland China, and also from Taiwan. And all of these different people really are operating not only in different cultural milieu, but also with starkly different doctrinal principles and formations in the background of their engagement. And so, what does this tell us? It tells us that at least one thing that it tells us, surely it could tell us many, is that we can continue to engage with people and break down these numbers. We can go from the 64 and the 24 and the 10. I forget what the previous numbers were. We could break them down even more. And then each of these numbers that we break down, we could break down even more. And we could get into deeper cultural particulars, historical particulars. How long has someone been here? How well is this community established? Geographical particulars, and surely many more. And all of that outside of the question of what specific traditional configuration of this religious practice is the dominant one in this community. We can do all of that. But all of that really can be taken to illustrate something of the futility of that approach if what we're looking at accomplishing is a change of heart. Instead, we could do something far more simple, which is actually something that's at the heart of the religious studies class that I teach and many religious studies methodologies, which is the recognition of internal diversity. Because we are in the same region, and we can start to talk about different perceptions. But at the same time, even in making that move to different perceptions, what we really must hold on to, I would suggest, is the issue of internal diversity. So frequently in our interfaith bridge building engagements, we'll have a real focus on what I would call external diversity. How do we live amongst others? How do I engage with you? And yet, internal diversity tells us that diversity is happening within each tradition, not just between them. It's happening within each community, not just in their larger aggregate. And moreover, I would suggest it's happening within each one of us, that we are also internally diverse. And to the extent that we're internally diverse, we should ask, how does that diversity manifest itself? Through what means? And if diversity implies
not just difference, but also a recognition of change and potential for change because of the different contributions that each element might bring, then how do we generate change within ourselves? Because if we can do it within ourselves, then there's a chance that we might also be able to engage in a change-making process that transforms others or allows others to engage in a similar process of transformation. So, another way to put this question would be, how do we inhabit difference without denial, naivety, or foreclosure? How do we engage in this internal diversity, both within ourselves and between ourselves, without denying difference? Something that I see all the time in interfaith work, when you have, for example, a panel where we focus on how we're all basically the same, which means that, well, difference isn't actually permitted here. We'll just allow the elements that tell the story we want to tell in. If you bring in anything else, you'll find that the door has been decisively closed to you. Why would you try to to undermine our beautiful story? Or naivety, maybe we just aren't aware of differences. And maybe, moreover, we want to stay that way. Maybe things are easier when we don't find out everything that there is to know about each other. Maybe it's easier for me to imagine that I don't need a change of heart when I fail to look deeply into myself and into the state of my heart. And moreover, foreclosure, the notion that perhaps I have looked into the situation. Perhaps I have allowed difference to be something that I consider, both in my community, in my immediate relationships, even within myself. But then the way that I understand that difference, the way that I understand that diversity is such that any kind of actual transformation or change that might result from it is actually precluded by the terms of the conversation. So difference is allowed as long as it doesn't change at all. And this is, again, an element that I find in interfaith bridge building all the time. How many times, for those of you who have done this for some time, I would ask you to recall how many times you've entered into an interfaith conversation and someone has stipulated, no, 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 no. Come in, come in. Everyone is welcome. You don't have to change your beliefs at all. Nothing about you needs to change. We're just so glad that you're here. And what I want to suggest is that while I understand the motivations for that stipulation, it may actually be counterproductive in as much as what it says is you won't need to change at all. So nothing about this engagement will be transformative. And not just for you, but for me either. So let's engage in a process where nothing about who we are and what we bring will allow anything about who we were before to be different when we leave. So, to strive to move beyond denial, naivety, or foreclosure, I think we can finally start to talk about what I really think is the heart of the matter, which is, in fact, I wish I had a snare drum, the heart itself, which is surely not merely a metaphor, although we use it that way all the time. And so I would like to ask a question, and I really am asking to all of you, and please feel free to just unmute and share if you'd like. What is a heart? I've talked about it a lot so far, but when you think of a heart or the heart or your heart, what are you thinking of? Well, feel free to drop something in the chat if you'd like to. When I ask this question, I ask it partially because if we were situated in a different cultural or historical space and we were answering, we would be able to give many different answers. For example, within the Quran, the word for heart most frequently used is the qalb. The qalb is a place, but it's also a set of capacities. This is a heart that sees, and a heart that judges, and a heart that listens, and a heart which, according to a hadith Qudsi, which is a hadith which is spoken by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but which is voiced in the voice of God, says, "For the entirety of my heaven and my earth could not contain me, but the heart of my beloved uh, believer does contain me." And the word used for heart here is qalb. This word qalb is directly connected, both symbolically and lexically, with the Hebrew word lev, which, interestingly enough, is something that is said to not only judge and see, but also, as I mentioned with the qalb, to listen, so much so that it's stated in the Torah that a heart that is unable to listen is unable to change because it is unable to learn. And so a listening heart is something that we could look to cultivate. Similar connotations are present in the Greek New Testament with the word cardia, where the heart is compared to a mirror, and also is given a similar set of capacities. So the heart is something that allows us to see others. The heart is something that allows us to hear others. It's something with which we taste reality. It's something that can be diseased. It's something that can be crooked. It's something that can be straightened. It's something that can be healed. These metaphors surely could be understood as maybe substitutions for other corporeal or psychological or spiritual processes. But these things have been reliably placed within heart language for some time. So continuing to explore that heart language can be instructive, especially if we go even further back, because we can find outside of what we might recognize as, Abrahamic religious discourses, and we could say, oh, sure, well, maybe that's applicable in the Near East, right? In an ancient Near Eastern context, or maybe in today's context in the United States. But is that the only way to think about this? Well, the answer from many of our faith traditions is that no, actually, there are other ways to think about this, but they're not contradictory. They're in fact deeply complementary. So, for example, we could look to the Heian period in Japanese poetry, and to the Kokin Wakashu, which is a compilation, the most important poetic compilation from that period. And in this text, we see that the heart is conceived of as the word in Japanese is kokoro, that the kokoro is conceived of as a place where seeds are planted and where the world is encountered, and it gives these reverberations that then are felt and the echoes of which persist within the poet. And then what the poet is doing is not simply saying, I feel in a certain way, but rather gathering those feelings within the space of their heart, experiencing them deeply, and then recording how those feelings change the landscape of their hearts. So that here, the landscape that's being sketched is internal and not external, which gives you some kind of idea of the extent to which we might be able to talk about heart exploration. Not the heart as simply one part of us among many others in the world that we inhabit out here, but the heart as a space within which an entire world, and indeed the entirety of the divine, for many of us, might be manifest. And in doing so, and thinking about kokoro, we could actually go back even farther in time to the Confucian and Neo-Confucian writers who talk about Shin, using the same character, but in a far more discreet way. They'll say that the thing that must be done with the heart is to balance it with the mind, not because they're separate, but actually because they speak of one phenomenon, the heart mind, that we know that the way that our thinking happens is affected by our feelings, but also that our feelings affect our thinking, that there's something about the way that we feel that can allow us to think in brand new ways. There's something about the heart that can make us look at the cup, see that it's full, and then reach into our bag to find the saffron. That this is a dynamic interchange. It's not solely that we find motivation in the heart, but actually that what we're doing is connecting with another set of logics that then can override, transform, in fact, elevate and empower us to engage with each other in ways that might seem to be beyond the bounds, that might seem to be an issue of impossibility because of how we have conceived of possible. And then we could go back even further, just one more time, to the notion of the hridaya. The hridaya being the heart within a Sanskrit discourse, a Vedic religious discourse, indeed a discourse that we find represented in multiple Upanishads from the tradition that we now refer to as Hinduism. And although this appears in multiple places, as early as the Taittiriya Upanishad, which is one of the first 10 scholars would date as one of the earliest 10 Upanishads, we can also find within the Chandogya Upanishad this notion of the hridaya as not just a place that allows us to see, or that allows us to hear, or to taste, in fact, or to feel what's going on. And it's not just a place that can change our thinking, but it's also a place that God can inhabit, and that, moreover, we can inhabit. And so they'll talk about the notion in the Chandogya Upanishad of the guha, the cave, which in other places will be explicitly called the cave of the heart. But this is a place unto which we can retreat from the world, a place that can accommodate us in the fullness of who we are, so much so that in accommodating us to the fullness of who we are, we might actually be able to fully become present, and in that becoming present, manifest our own divinity in a way that we come to understand as being identical to our own identity. That's a lot. See how much the heart can hold. And these are long-standing traditions that have continued through many of our faiths, which also means that they are traditions that we as human beings have a right to appeal to whenever we ask the question of why do changes of hearts seem impossible, and how might we go about experiencing that change. And so in a brief summary, we could ask, or we could reflect and say, out of its many capacities, the heart can be said to give us a form of perception, a novel form of perception, or forms of perception. There's no reason to limit it to one. In some traditions, they actually very clearly distinguish between these different perceptions, or even epistemologies, ways of knowing that emerge from the heart. It can be a source of volition. So we can will one thing or will another, and we can will that we will something else. This can get complex very quickly, but volition has long been associated within our religious traditions. Many religious traditions, the vast majority of them, in fact, will associate will with the heart. Reflection, as we just talked about with the cave of the heart, not only a place where we can reflect on the heart, but we can reflect within the heart. There's a way of connecting with our hearts that enables that kind of reflection. And in that reflection, we can become aware of our desires, and how that informs our volition, how that is informed by our perception, and in fact also informs our perception. And in so doing, we can find ways of connecting. And in those connections, we can then think about how connection takes place. And as I've kind of signaled throughout this talk, one of the ways that we can think about that, and one of the things that we find actually recurrent through many of our faith traditions, is the notion that connection is not just dependent upon some bridge that we can build to another, but it's actually far more intimate. It's about bringing others inside of ourselves, inside of our hearts. And that connection then can actually come down to an issue of capaciousness. How much can the heart hold? Not just how open are we to conversation, but how capable are we of making a space in our heart for those who might not seem to fit inside our worldview or the parameters of our coalition. And so we should ask this question: what can the heart hold? And the answer is surely variable. So we might say my heart is so broad that it holds everyone in this room, or everyone in this city, or everyone in this country, or everyone in this world. And we may not believe a person that says any of those things. But we could say that. And then someone might say, okay, everyone in this world, but do you mean everyone from your religious tradition or your cultural background or your ethnic makeup? Do you mean everyone from your class? Is that who you mean? And if that's what you mean, are those hard limits? Or is it possible that the heart could hold more? And so what I'd like to suggest is that this is one way of modeling this. Surely there could be others, perhaps there are better ones. But when we think about what shapes our heart, we should, at the very least, think about the perspectives we have, our worldviews, what we value, and then also the structures that inform us, the things that seem to be outside of us that deeply shape the things within us. And these could be cultural structures, economic structures. These could be structures of oppression. These could be power structures. These could be family structures. These could be internal family structures. This could be many different things. But we can separate the structural piece maybe from the action piece, which would be what I feel like I'm immediately capable of, or what I feel like I myself, and the people with whom I'm in solidarity, what we're capable of. The structures are the things that maybe seem to constrain those capabilities or enable those capabilities, and the perspectives are what allow us to perceive those structures, however incompletely, and also to formulate how our actions might impact things and to assess their results. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, we will find the heart and its capacity. I would suggest that an enlarged heart in this specific instance, in this metaphorical instance, allows us to take greater actions, to recognize solidarity in places maybe we wouldn't have seen it before, to recognize shared struggles that might not be articulated in ways that we immediately recognize, to recognize perspectives that are outside of our viewpoint, that are outside of our everyday experience. And moreover, to recognize structures which are outside of the structures we've used to enforce our own identity, or which have done that for us. And so somewhere in between these forces, we get an image of a heart that both shapes and can be shaped, that is informed by what we see and informs what we see, that is informed by where we're positioned historically, culturally, politically, economically, and at the same time informs how we react to those structures, how we imagine that they should be different, how we experience oppression and power, how we wield oppressive forces and power. And then also, which informs and directs through volition and through empathy the actions that we take, given our perspectives and the structures with which we interact. And rightfully then, I think, if we accept this model or something like it, we would say that the heart is quite literally the heart of the matter. It is the center of these interactions, which is then makes it somewhat curious the way that we often in interfaith spaces think about the heart. And I'm thinking about this specifically in the context of interfaith work that I've done over the last 3 or 4 years, which again, as I noted earlier when I was speaking about polarization, is often really kind of parsed into civic language with a civic focus. The notion is that, well, if I put on my beliefs as a person of faith, or as a spiritual person, or as a person that's interested in these kind of existentially ultimate or transcendent questions, or as a person who is connecting in some way that might loosely be described as spiritual or faith-driven, if I'm any of those things, and I put down all my beliefs, and I talk to the person sitting across from me, And actually, I don't even talk to them. I just ask them to put down all of their beliefs, and we hold up our two sheets of paper. We could probably draw any number of contradictions between these two. But if we have shared goals and work on a shared project, if we move from our head to our hands, then we will have done two things. Hopefully, we'll have accomplished whatever the project was. Maybe we'll have fed some people. Maybe we will have built a house. Maybe we will have started a more enduring organization that can think about how to benefit both our communities and other communities. Maybe we can do all of that. But through the hands, we can find commonality in a way that the head would not have been able to find had it been limited to the logical calculus of compatible and incompatible beliefs. And yet you'll notice in everything that I just said, there's very little mention of the heart. We could say that we move from the head to the hands, and then maybe every once in a while we get to the heart. And we will all have examples, I'm sure, for those of us who have been engaged in this kind of work for some time. We'll have examples of times when our hearts changed through a deepening friendship with someone else, where we had a realization that changed the way that we viewed something. But that's not, it's often seen as like a byproduct of this. And the way that I've heard this parsed in many conversations is in such a way that, again, recalling what I said earlier about the assumption that in interfaith interactions, you shouldn't have to change. Nothing about you should have to be different. There should be a presumption of that you will come with an identity and leave with the same identity. What we lose in that is the transformative potential of the heart. And if we preclude that transformative potential from the beginning, then it makes sense that it might be like a felicitous byproduct of this interaction. But it couldn't be the center if we adopt those coordinates for interfaith work and interfaith bridge building. So as I write here, the heart is treated as a hoped for outcome all too frequently, but only rarely as an active participant in transformation. And to this model, I would offer a counter model, a model which is a virtuous cycle, one in which the head and the hands and the heart are integrated, where we start from the heart, from the level of capaciousness that we have. How much room can we make for others? From that stance, we then use our head to begin engaging with others. We then enact that engagement through, our head to engage with others, and we enact that engagement through our hands, and all of this returns back to the heart, when hopefully an increased capacity that will then inform not only how we understand those perceived incompatibilities, perhaps even will dissolve some of those perceived incompatibilities, but also will expand our understanding of what we can do with our hands for others. This virtuous cycle is what I'm recommending, as opposed to the more linear model that we just saw. And then the question is, what does that look like in concrete terms? I could be accused, surely, of presenting things in an all too abstract way. And as a person who loves philosophy, I will almost always be guilty of this charge. And yet, I do have a couple of concrete, semi-concrete proposals for how we might approach this. So how do we move from the head to the heart? So when I was preparing for this talk and reflecting on a history of interfaith engagement alongside friends like my dear brother Tahill, who's present here, I started thinking about things that were really valued, or that, and I should say more concretely, that I really valued as a deeply religious person who not only was not engaged in interfaith work, but was avowedly opposed to any such thing whenever I was younger. And the things that I would have really prioritized at that point, whether or not I would have used exactly this language, would have been something like certainty, a belief that my understanding of faith gave me specific answers that were not only perfectly clear, but completely beyond debate. In fact, to the extent that they appeared uncertain, this would never have been viewed in any positive way as granting maybe the potential for lateral movement or an opportunity to discover unsuspected points of overlap or complementary logics, but rather as a deficiency that would need to be remedied with further argumentation until certainty had been attained once more and all doubt had been sealed away. And of course, because something like that, in my view, a perfectly certain conclusion regarding ultimate and transcendental things, in my view, is an impossibility, then you can't, it leads to the conclusion, at least it would have led to the conclusion for me, that if anything was wrong, it was because there was some sort of problem in the logic that needed to be fixed. And that problem could very well be an impurity in the system. Now, there's no coincidence that scholars of fascism will often point toward this notion of purity as being a staple of fascist ideologies. You'll often hear in this kind of political study. So again, apropos of the political in this talk, although it's not at the center in some way, it is still the heart of what I'm discussing. You'll hear that fascist logics presuppose a social body, that social body in its pristine form is totally healthy, as long as everyone is in their right place. That entails some being on top of others, some being dominated by others, some being subjected to the will of others. And that should that be the case, everything will go swimmingly. It's the natural order. It ought to be that way. And to the extent that there are contradictions and breakdown in the social body, well, that must mean that either things are out of order or an impure element has been introduced. And this is when we'll start to hear people talking about disease, corruption, parasites, the kind of language that leads to dehumanization, demonization, and eventually starts to justify things like ethnic cleansing and genocide. So the word purity is something that we should be very careful with in our employment of it. In fact, as we saw with our example from Guru Nanak Dev Ji at the beginning of this talk, there would be an argument to be made that the milk flavored by the saffron had been rendered impure. It wasn't simply milk anymore. And yet what we see here is that addition was in fact an enhancement and not something that detracted from that purity. So understanding purity and its connection to certainty, we can also look at a final element, which is foreclosure. Now, I probably wouldn't have used this language whenever I was much younger. I might have talked about defensiveness, creating a wall against incursion, making sure that everyone is protected. But foreclosure often means something like isolation, quarantine, the kinds of things that happen when you value purity and have established certainty about the nature of the purity of your community. Foreclosure, then, is not only about sealing off, but making sure that we block off any way forward, so that change is no longer possible either. It's not just that we want this zone to be separate, but we want any internal change also to be foreclosed, for which reason we are in violation, stark violation of that principle to which I had gestured earlier, one which I think is of supreme importance in these sorts of interactions, namely the principle of internal diversity, not just external diversity and pluralism, but internal diversity both within our traditions, our communities, and ourselves. And so what does it look like to do the thing that I'm suggesting? Because one could say, well, I'm certain that I don't have any certainty. Or one could say, I have completely banished purity. I'm not concerned with it at all. I'm impure. Because I've been purified of purity. I could also say that I no longer foreclose anything. I'm not going anywhere, but the door is open. So what does it look like to not just have a negative assessment of these principles or a rejection or a devaluation or at the very least a reconsideration of these notions of certainty and purity and foreclosure? Well, what I'm wanting to suggest is that there is a kind of dual motion we can accomplish here, in the same way that the heart has a systolic and diastolic function where things circulate out and then circulate back in. There's kind of a motion forward and a motion of return that can be accomplished through a couple of forward-looking principles that not only attempt to move beyond certainty, purity, and foreclosure, but to replace them with something different, which is both different in its qualities, but also different in its direction, in as much it's pointed toward those with whom we would like to connect. And so instead of certainty, we have curiosity. And what does it mean to be curious? It's not simply that I want to see what the next thing is, but rather, curiosity can be understood, and I would offer, as an acknowledgement that there is always something beyond me that is worthy of engaging with, something that I can always learn more from, something that could meaningfully change the way that I see things. And if it could change the way that I see things, and the way that I see things in large part determines who I am, then it could also change the way that I am. Because if you have nothing to bring to the table that's worthy of curiosity, then why would I expect to be transformed? Why would you even come? Why would I have anything for you? But if we make curiosity the bedrock of our conversations, it is equivalent to saying, I think you have something worthy of sharing. I think I might have something that you might think is worthy of sharing. And it might be so worthy of sharing that it actually has an impact. And if it has an impact, it might have an enduring impact. And an enduring impact could lead to enduring change. We have a role in catalyzing change within each other. But that can only be accomplished if we put to the side concerns for purity, which can include ideological purity, political purity, and instead respond with vulnerability. I am open to change. Not just that I'm interested in it in a purely intellectual way, but that I'm open to the possibility that change could happen in my heart. And here we see that movement from head, an open mind, curiosity, to the vulnerability of an open heart. And then we have to ask a question. How is it, now that I'm open to change, or striving to be open to change, both in my head and in my heart, how is it that I can accomplish this? How is it that that can be accomplished in me by another? And surely there's lots of answers one could give. But I think all of them are contingent. All of them rely upon, are deeply dependent upon proximity. I'm going to have to get close to somebody. It doesn't matter how open I am, how open-minded I am, if I'm never close enough to someone for change to be possible. And the thing about proximity is that what seems to be possible from a distance is almost always revealed to be different than what's possible when we're shoulder to shoulder, when our hands meet. A new arena for change, a new degree of possibility is opened up. That very field of possibility to which I alluded earlier can shift, and then our curiosity and vulnerability can welcome in the potential for change that could never have even been sighted when we were used to keeping our distance. And so ultimately, this is my contention as we come close to the end of this, and I want to make sure I have time for questions. My contention is that a capacious heart is not a defenseless heart. That if we make this move from certainty to curiosity, if we make the move from purity to vulnerability, if we strive to do this all within a space where change can really happen because we've gone beyond foreclosure and moved into proximity, that we won't simply be defenseless. That in the face of change, there is still a kind of protection. but that protection will come in a different form because all of the change that I'm talking about, hence the issue of proximity in this space, is change that happens in a community environment. It's change that happens between people. And the things that we need to make that change both possible and sustainable are also the things we need to afford the protection necessary to safeguard us as we engage with the unknown, both between each other and within each other. And I would suggest that those things are these qualities that I've listed here: mercy, forgiveness, accountability, and mutual protection. And so, what I'm offering in this talk, perhaps in a long winded way, is a return of sorts. A return from the question of partisanship to nonpartisanship, a return from the issue of polarization to depolarization, a return back from the engagement at the community level, where what we're trying to do is see how our concrete positions can remain the same while being renegotiated within a broader civic space, a return to ourselves, to our own hearts, and then in the realization of all that our hearts can contain at this moment and could contain as we cultivate them, a return to an understanding of how doing that could allow us to create new heartfelt communities wherein we build these virtues and model these virtues of mercy and forgiveness and accountability and mutual protection, such that we can meet together with open hearts, with hearts that are reinvigorated, with hearts that are full of curiosity, with hearts that are ready to embrace otherness, with hearts that are understandably concerned about being wounded and have been wounded, and with hearts that will be uplifted and healed and repaired in community whenever those things happen, such that they can also endure when things become difficult and outstrip our abilities as individuals and what any of our hearts in particular can hold. What I'm offering is some kind of model of return, which I hope in community will offer us a path forward, not a path away from our current political struggles, not one that simply strives to lower the temperature, but one that tries to find once more our deep reliance upon each other, and then tries to realize through that reliance a deepened understanding of our dignity, of our need for love, of our abilities to serve each other, of our abilities to heal and protect each other. And then in this, we will hopefully find new solidarities, which will make the question of mere depolarization appear as a laughable distraction at the other side of a new political horizon. Humble goal, surely. And so thank you to all of you. This is my information. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can tell that I don't enjoy conversation or talking. Hard to wrench another word out of me. But I would be so happy to support any of you. And if you have any questions, I am so happy to entertain them now as well.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was, I mean, I think just the way you reevaluate the depth at which we should be engaging people, I think really means a lot. I think it makes me, really curious as to how the sort of imagination around curiosity, proximity, and vulnerability impacts the way that we consider, um, empathy, compassion, our ability to say, oh, someone who I think is absolutely different from me ends up being closer to me by some other reason, by some other method. Um, and it also makes me think really clearly about just some of the ways in how you shared, the understandings of the heart. I think are really amazing and interesting examples of that. I mean, talking about the Hridev coming from obviously Sanskrit, talking about the qalb, coming from Arabic, coming from the Muslim tradition. Um, it is really peculiar how the heart plays a much bigger role than just what we see as like what we might just associate with love. And it's sort of like platonic, emotional, physical attributes of it, and how like the spiritual engagement of love actually leads us into a more profound conversation about why interconnectedness is a reality and not just something that we try to imagine just because it's only connected based on values and experiences.
Oh, I'm so glad. I mean, you're picking up on so many of the things that I really would have wanted to share, and this is something that I've noticed. I've been spending a lot of time with mystics of various sorts in my reading, I should say, and people like Ibn Arabi, Fakhruddin Iraqi, and Meister Eckhart. And one of the things that I find, which is so interesting, and it's kind of it has certain resonances with this whole conversation around depolarization,
Mhm.
albeit inverse ones, where what you see is that so often I feel like in our society, love is held up as like this refuge from the world. Like, oh, I have the ones that I love. I have my community that I love. I have this one person maybe that I love. I love my family. And I have to go out and deal with all of these other people. And they hurt me or they make things difficult. But then I go back to my love, right? Love becomes like kind of this refuge or sanctuary. But for the mystics in these traditions, and surely there are comparable analogs, if not completely perfect ones, and many traditions, what you find is that love is not a separator. It's not something that exists as opposed to everything else. But these mystics would instead argue that the deeper our understanding of love becomes, which for them is almost like quite explicitly always parsed as a move deeper into our own hearts, what we find is that love, far from being something that separates us, so deeply binds us with every element of the world that some of them will eventually go on to say that to the contrary of all appearances, all that there is love. I mean, I'm looking at I've got a poster I've got over here. All you need is love. The mystical answer is no, 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 no. There's nothing else but love. All you are is love. All there is love. And depending upon the day, I may or may not be willing to believe that. But what I would like to point toward is that there's something in this consideration of love and the way that so many different faith traditions have engaged with, and it's so interesting to me that it's like the heart specifically. And they'll have a conversation about it's not the physical organ we're talking about, but we're still going to use these words, and there's a reason why. And then it will be this place where, like, in this movement within, I actually become part of a movement without, but through a different lens, with different objectives, with a different capacity that then allows me to see everything outside of me and this in this different way that allows for a broader embrace, a broader incorporation, and new kinds of solidarity. And quite honestly, in a time when I hear people talking about uh, not knowing the lines of struggle, not knowing how we can find solidarity in the first place, when people don't have monocultures, broadly speaking, anymore. We don't all watch the same TV shows. We don't all work on the factory floor. We don't. We Our oppression takes the form of atomization quite frequently. There's never been a time that more direly urged and necessitated new forms of togetherness. And I think that this looking to the heart, looking to these ancient traditions of the heart and their modern manifestations might well be a place, a platform from which to view these new modes, which again could not be more or more pressing to uncover in this moment.
No, that's yeah, I mean, you're talking about moving something a lot more than just a political perspective or trying to redeem a narrative that um takes people from being dehumanized to becoming dignified. It's way more about like, well, actually, there's no way to see yourselves as existing without the really deep conclusion that it has to be with everyone else and that there is no other way. And I think
Absolutely.
that's a really profound thing that I don't think people really understand too much because of how we silo ourselves politically, socially, economically. And I think there's something really interesting about that that could be worth exploring a lot more than you already have today. Um, so I just want to make sure that if anyone would like to leave a question or a comment, that they do so now. We do only have a few minutes before the top of the hour. Um, but thankfully we do have this recording for us to be able to share, but also for folks to be able to for you to even look back and really think about what you said and see how you can expand on it even more. So if anyone would like to unmute or leave a comment in the chat, please feel welcome to do so. And now is the time because we're about to wrap up. I think one thing I do have curiosity about as people may think of considering commenting or asking a question, is, how does this play out in the context of individuals or communities that have been traumatized
Hmm.
due to violence, due to narratives that have played enough of a role that they see no other way um, around this reality except the one that they feel is righteous, which is that another group of people is their enemy, period.
Mm-hmm.
I I know we don't have too much time to be able to delve into that, but I do wonder, where do those points of proximity, curiosity, and vulnerability come up where when we talk about major issues around Palestine and Israel, to
Hmm.
Kashmir, Taiwan, to ongoing conversations about political violence, war, where
Mm-hmm.
there is this just a binary idea that these people are the inherently good ones and these are the inherently bad ones. How do you bring people together to be able to engage in a conversation like that where they have to just immediately rupture their thinking about a reality that they thought was correct about a
Mm-hmm.
whole different community of people. So that's just something that, comes to mind.
Yeah, and I think that that is obviously the deepest challenge that you could have surfaced in this conversation. I think what maybe I would want to point to is and uh, quite purposely, right? I started this conversation by calling it an exploration, which means that I don't arrive at conclusions. But one of the things that I would say in the course of this exploration is that I think this model is one way that we can understand things like uh, pacifist and nonviolent movements. Not solely the adoption of a rejection of violence, but also as a way of manifesting proximity to the other, to the violent, oppressive other, in ways that cause them to, through their sight of the situation, um, to in some way be proximate enough to question uh, some element of their prejudice, and then that can lead to a curiosity, and then the
Mm,
desire to understand that curiosity can lead to a vulnerability. So
mhm,
these don't necessarily need to be manifest simultaneously, but then I would also say that the struggle, in some sense, in as much as I want to universalize it, obviously asks different things from different people. And one of the things is, and this is the thing that I think anyone that is well versed in nonviolent resistance will say is nonviolent resistance means to have a willingness to suffer a maximal amount of violence, and a recognition of the high probability that that should be the case. And I
mm,
am not in a position, as a person who does not think that I'm capable at this moment of subscribing to that fully, of critiquing either anyone that subscribes to that or anyone who engages in resistance that eschews that out of necessity. And
mm,
so, again, what I'm trying to point to are what I think are underlying dynamics and characteristics of human beings. And the question of how we marshal them, especially in these incredibly difficult situations of oppression, violence, and suffering, um, I think is is both almost insoluble from my personal perspective for the moment, but also incredibly pressing, and maybe the most pressing of the questions. And so maybe my last suggestion would be that these principles also operate internally. So within communities that have been traumatized, marginalized, etc., the need to maintain proximity, vulnerability, and curiosity vis-a-vis other members of that community is also a starting point. Because one of the things that I see is also within in groups, quite frequently, whatever we take to be our shared ideological disposition or worldview often becomes more concretized than it is in any individual case, which means that even strategic flexibility can be compromised, and that purity politics that compromises solidarity can then also become dominant. And so I would say that even if it's not a universally we all embrace this simultaneously, I think it should be something we strive for within all of our communities with the eventual hope of expanding, but certainly within our communities itself. And I've seen so many communities that had emancipatory aims collapse in on themselves because of this very issue, that I think I would really want to prioritize that as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, with that, Chris, thank you so much for your time, your insights, your discernment. I wouldn't call this anything less than discernment. It's the proper word for, I think, the kind of depth that you're inviting people to engage in. Um, and I hope this is an opportunity for folks to really think about how deep we often have to go and how profound these relationships have to be for us to really see systemic, cultural, and positive social change. Because it really does begin with those relationships. And I think Chris has found a lot of really key points for us to consider in exploring that, but it also gives us an open opportunity to see how we do that under new and pertinent circumstances. So thank you so much for your time, Chris. Thank you for those who were able to join today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to having more conversations like this that make us think deeper and do better work in terms of interfaith cooperation. So on behalf of the center, thank you so much and wishing everyone a good weekend.
Thank you all.